On this episode of One on One, our guest tonight is from Thibodaux. He's a very prominent attorney and comes from a very prominent family. Who is that guest? You'll find out coming up shortly on this edition of One on One. As promised, Jerald Block is in the house. Jerald, good to see you today.
Good to see you, Martin. How are you?
Good. Take us down memory lane. What's the earliest years you remember? Where were you born, and what was it like? Paint a picture for us.
Martin, we grew up in a small house in Thibodaux. My dad was in the furniture business, and he had a lot of other interests, but it was me, my brother Harold, who I think you've had on one-on-one, my sister June, who's 4 years older, and my sister Claire, who's 4 years younger than I am.
Okay.
And you know, I mean, Thibodaux in those days was a great place because, I mean, you know, you didn't have to worry about your kids on the street, and we could go anywhere we wanted to. We'd probably, you know, during the summertime, like now, we would ride around with our bicycles, etc., and you'd probably be gone all day. And parents didn't even know where we were, you know, but we'd go to the park and we'd do things like that in the park, get in trouble, stay out of trouble, but it was great. I mean, growing up in Thibodaux I was born in 1946, so growing up in Thibodaux in the, you know, kind of the 50s and the 60s was a great place. I mean, it was very quiet, and, you know, everybody knew everybody else, and it was a great place to live.
I was born in Thibodaux in 1960. We moved to Houma when I was 1, so I didn't get a privilege of growing up in Thibodaux, but all my family lived in Thibodaux. So every time we would drive down to visit family, there was Block furniture as we passed by.
Right.
It was synonymous with Thibodaux. What was it like? What do you remember about it? And take us back to those days.
Martin, I worked there from the point in time when I was about 12 years old. I think my dad probably didn't trust me to do anything else except dust all the furniture. And so that was my first job, dusting furniture. There was a lot of furniture, a lot more than I wanted it to be. But you know, it was an institution, really. And part of the reason I think it was an institution is because the people that my dad hired, Tony Conjemi and Tibby Boudreau and Gloria Melanson and Jim Rhodes and Raymond Bowden and people like that, they started, that was their first job, and it was their last job. And so it was a Block Furniture Store was an institution, but the people that worked there made it an institution as well, because they were so happy to work there. My dad was an easy guy to get along with. He was a humble guy, and he was, you know, he just believed in keeping good people and using their talents, and you know, it was, you know, one of the better businesses in Thibodaux during those time periods. I mean, it was great.
I was going to say, you and your brother, I don't know your sisters, but both have a great work ethic. Did you get it from him, or did your mom have a lot to do with it?
No, I think we got it from both of them.
Okay.
You know, I mean, the story, and of course, I don't know that this is in 100% accurate, but the story is that my mom went to work at Block Furniture Store, and the way that she got the job is because she supposedly told my dad that she could talk French, but she couldn't talk French. So every time somebody would come in and they would talk French, she would go and get her mom and bring her mom to the furniture store and have her mom do the translation. Okay. But mom was a hard worker. She was a very dedicated, I mean, she was a great mom, but she was also a person that kind of drove us into doing well, being focused, you know, believing in work as, you know, what you had to do.
So she was energetic, because back in those days, the moms stayed at home. She wanted to go to work.
Exactly. But she wanted to go to work, but she also was a great partner to my dad, because, you know, he would run things, you know, and he would say, look, how do you feel about this? And she would she was very participatory
Yeah.
in the business.
Okay, very good.
So it was great. But I mean, really, a lot of our work ethic is from our dad. I mean, you know, he died when he was 95 years old. He was going to be 96. And I think that he had gone to work about 2 weeks before he died. You know, so he just, you know, that was all he ever did.
Yeah.
I mean, he just worked hard. Never had any real hobbies, just worked hard, and that's all he did.
Tell us about the early days in Thibodaux when you were growing up. What schools did you go to, and what was it like? You know, once again, paint a picture of what was Thibodaux like back then?
Well, Thibodaux was a quiet place. I mean, I think, you know, it was always a bedroom community. People lived there and they worked other places. They worked in the sugarcane industry. They worked at McDermott. They worked at Camco. But it was always a bedroom community, always a community where people knew each other, and that's where they stayed. You know, that's where they raised their families. And it was, you know, I went to Thibodaux Elementary School. We walked to school because we were close enough to walk to school. Went to Thibodaux Junior High School, Thibodaux High School. So I graduated from Thibodaux High School. Our first home was at the corner of Good Street and Menard.
Okay.
And then what happened is my dad never wanted to spend the money to do it, but my mother wound up seeing the house on the corner of LA1 and Good Street, and they eventually bought that.
Okay.
And then my mom passed away in '97, and I bought. That's where I live now because I bought it from my mom and dad, and I mean from my dad and from my brothers and sisters.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. But I can remember that strip down Louisiana 1. They had the florist, then they had, I think, the Pelche house. But who had the Santa Claus on the porch? Do you remember that?
That was Harvey Pelche and May Pelche.
Okay.
And they had the Santa Claus that they would put up right before Christmas, and it was an animated Santa Claus.
Right.
You know, and it was right on the front porch. And that's now, the Pelches were generous enough that they wound up giving that house to the Houma Thibodaux Diocese for the residence of the bishop, and that's where Bishop Sam Jacobs lives now.
And they had a florist further up the road, closer to the
Deidros Florist.
Right. They had, also had a Santa Claus.
Yeah, they had a Santa Claus as well. You're right. You have good memory.
So y'all had Santa Claus all over.
Santa Claus was on the right and the left. But the Pelches wound up at some point in time, and I don't remember the dates, but whenever the Houma Thibodaux Diocese was formed, they donated the house, the Pelche home, to the Diocese of Houma Thibodaux for the residence of the bishop. And that's where Bishop Boudreaux lived, that's where Bishop Jerald lived, and that's where Bishop Sam Jacobs lives now.
Yeah, it's a beautiful house.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
So you bought the family house.
I bought the family home, and it was probably in about 2001, somewhere around there. I bought the family home, and that's where we live. My
So
wife
you
and I
felt
live
it
there.
important to own the family home to keep the legacy.
I did. At first, Martin, it was kind of like everybody else. I said, look, I don't want a big house like that, and I don't really need a big house, but we want to keep it in the family, and it's been such a great tradition in our family to have that home, and you know, it's something I know my mom and my dad would have wanted us to do. So.
When did you know you were going to be an attorney?
Yeah, and I guess my dad probably wanted my brother Harold and me to be in the furniture business. I think that was probably what he wanted. But I think we both took the position that if we were in that business, that he would always want to be the boss, and so he would want to maintain ownership and control, and so Harold and I went and we started practice in 1971. But I think when I was in college, I went to Tulane undergraduate school, and then I guess when I was in college, I said, you know, I want to pursue a law degree. Nobody in our family had ever been lawyers before except our cousin. who lived in Atlanta, Georgia. But Harold and I both decided that's what we wanted to do, and
So did
we
y'all
both did it.
discuss it before? There
Oh,
was something-
yeah, we discussed it. We
Okay.
discussed it, and then we went into practice together in 1971.
And then you have a son who's practicing.
I have a
that.
son, Matthew, who practices with me. I have a, and he's doing real well. As a matter of fact, he's in a jury trial in Baton Rouge right now as we speak.
And we've had him on HTV.
He's
a few
been on
times for
HTV.
election coverage.
Yeah,
Great,
he sure
great
has.
guy. So what was it like practicing with your brother and then turning around and practicing with your son?
Well, it was great with my brother. It was a point in time, Martin, when everything was really different than it is now. The practice of law was not so much of a business, but there were great mentors in those days. Mr. John Pugh was a lawyer in Thibodeau. Bobby Morvant, Robert Morvant, who's Cam's dad.
Right.
They were Donald Pelche. They were kind of a group of lawyers, older lawyers. At least I thought they were older lawyers back then, but older lawyers who were really mentors for us, who helped us. Clyde Kiowette, different people. Mr. Walter Lanier, Sr.
Right.
And they were great lawyers. They were studious about what they did. They tended to mentor the young guys. Me and Harold being some of the young guys in those days, and it was great because
It was more mentoring back then.
yeah, it was more mentoring. They spent more time with you. You would, if you sat down with them, they weren't always busy like people are today. And they were willing to sit down with you and say, this is how we do this. This is how we handle this. So I was real proud to be part of that and learn from those guys who I really respected and thought they were great lawyers. And I still use some of their techniques today, when I'm in court, and I remember that some of the things they taught me. But the main thing I think they taught us is keep your word.
Right. It seems like the internet has changed the way attorneys do business. It's made everybody quicker, faster.
Exactly.
Was that good for the profession, or did it make everybody move too quickly at times?
Martin, I think it has been overall good, but sometimes things go a little too quickly. And I'm sure most clients, though, would sit there and say, no, they don't go quickly enough.
Right.
But sometimes, you have to let a case mature to the point where it's ready for trial. And sometimes now it's a little bit quicker than it should be. People are responding a little bit quicker than they probably should without giving it enough thought. Whereas in those days, we'd write a letter, and then 3 days later, the person received the letter, and then 3 days after that, you'd get their letter. So, a week went by before there was really any, communication between even the lawyers in Thibodeau.
I've seen you in the courtroom. You have a great memory. Is this something you learned, or is it something you had to practice along the way?
I would say both. I would say both. I watched. I always like to say that I never had an original thought, so I learned from other people and I watched them do things, and I wound up realizing, I think, that memory and trying to remember things, trying to remember jurors' names, trying to do things like that, made a connection between me and the jury, made a connection between me and the witness, and sometimes opposing counsel as well. So I do think that, remembering people's names and remembering facts about their depositions, etc., I think it's been very helpful.
Being from Thibodeau, but you practice a lot in Houma too. So there's multiple judges. We all know the judges in Thibodeau, no disrespect, everybody's different. Thibodeau's a different town than Houma. So as an attorney, do you have to learn all the personalities, and when you're home on a Sunday night and you're going, got court tomorrow in Houma or court tomorrow in Thibodeau, so here's my game plan because I have Judge so-and-so who's behind the bench?
Well, yeah, I think there's no doubt about that. But you're a good example of what I'm going to say right now, and that is, you know your audience. You have to know your audience, right? I mean, so if you have a judge who you know is a very linear thinker, somebody that goes from point A to point Z, you have to be prepared to do that kind of presentation. And whereas if you know somebody, another judge, and that judge is a little less linear, but also somebody that is willing to pick up on things a little differently than a judge who might be a linear thinker, then you have to make that presentation. So essentially, I think you have to know your audience. And if you know your audience, whether it's somebody giving a speech somewhere, or somebody making a presentation in court, or you being on HTV and being in a situation where you know your audience, you're going to know what they want to hear, what they're interested in.
But some judges, and I've seen all of them covering stories, some are funny, some don't ever joke at all.
This is true.
You have to know all that, don't you?
You do. You do. Some do not appreciate humor. Some appreciate humor a lot.
Right.
Some
create humor.
Some create humor. Right. There's some in Houma that I could think of right off the top of my head. Yeah. There's some in Thibodeau that are like that. But I've been practicing a long time. I mean, I've been practicing 42 years. And so, I can remember, Judge Greenberg. I can remember Bernard Knobloch and judges like that Roland Falgout, and lots of judges who were really, I thought, really good judges.
That was the old school judge.
It was the old school, and Judge Martinez. In the days when I first started, and it was a lot different now. The judges now spend a lot of their time, Martin, on criminal cases, on domestic relations cases, on juvenile cases, and there was a lot less of that back when I started in 1971.
Who was the one judge that when you were going in, it might be one or two, but you're going in, you're going, I better be on my A game. What judge was that?
I would say Jerry Barbera, Judge Barbera, is a judge that I have tremendous respect for. I respect all the judges, but I've had a lot of cases in front of Judge Barbera. And I think he is a very practically minded judge, but he demands your preparation. He demands for you to be prepared. Now,
you got to win your case, in other words.
Yeah. Now, look, I practice also in front of Judge Lanier's dad, and I practice in front of Judge Lanier, who's Judge Lanier III. They both very much require you to be prepared. Judge Lanier Jr., who was not only on the district court bench but also on the Court of Appeal, he was very stringent about the rules of evidence and what you had to know and how you had to present it. I practiced law with Randy Payroll. I practiced law with John Weimer. And then wound up practicing in front of them. And they were also judges who required preparation, and you had to be on your A game with them too.
I ran into Judge Payroll the other night while eating in Thibodeau and was surprised to know that his favorite show was The Beat. He watches The Beat regularly. So.
Well.
But he has a good sense of humor.
Oh, he always has a great sense of humor. He was always, good to be in front of and good to practice in front of, and he always kept it a little light,
And I asked this to Judge Barbera when he was on one-on-one, but as a judge, a lot of people practicing in your courtroom, you're friends with. So you got to be careful how you go to lunch. And does that make it harder in Thibodeau? Everybody knows everybody.
It's not just impropriety, but the appearance of impropriety that I think really affects the judges. They are very cautious about going to lunch and being with somebody, and then they see somebody and somebody thinks, well, there must be something going on. When the truth is,
it's really unfair, but I guess that's the appearance.
Yeah, when the truth is, there's probably nothing going on other than talking about family and different things like that. But it looks bad, and I think the judges are very cautious about that.
What's your first case and how nervous were you?
Very nervous. Judge Knobloch, I can remember this very well, and it involves Judge Lottinger. Now, I'm talking about Judge Lottinger Sr., not Morris Lottinger,
okay, right.
his dad.
Right. Okay.
But what happened is, right after Harold and I graduated from law school, Bernard Knobloch became a judge. And he was always a family friend. And so he had a kind of a group of cases. And we were coming in, and he said, well, look, why don't you guys take over all my cases? So we did. And one of the cases was an appeal in front of the Louisiana First Circuit in Baton Rouge. All the cases from Houma, Terrebonne Parish, Lafourche Parish, et cetera, go to Baton Rouge as our court of appeal. And so I was very young as a lawyer, very inexperienced as a lawyer, and I had this argument in front of the Court of Appeal. And I was sitting in the law library, scared to death, waiting for my chance to make my oral argument. And Judge Lottinger walked in. And I didn't know Judge Lottinger very well, but he walked up to me and introduced himself. This is before the argument, and said, look, I'm Morris Lottinger, and you know, I know your family, and when you're up there today, all we care about is this one particular issue. Just concentrate on that one particular issue. And it was like this relief kind of washed over me, because it was him kind of giving me some guidance. He didn't tell me what to say, but it was at least an idea on how to make the presentation that I thought was like a godsend when I was there, and it helped me focus, and it made me a little less anxious.
Did he know it was your first case?
He knew it was my first case. He did.
In a way, he was helping.
No, he knew it was my first case. Okay. He came to me and said, you know, I mean, and he was just, you know, he was just kind, and it meant a lot to me.
Like his son.
Yeah, exactly.
The pear don't fall far from the tree.
No, but he was, you know, it was kind of one of those things where I thought, this is an opportunity to make a connection here, and he was making a connection with me and knew probably that I was anxious about it.
How old were you?
At that point, I was 24, I think. And so it was, you know, first case, Court of Appeal, that sort of thing. And that was, in those days, that was a big deal.
Did you win it?
I did.
All right.
I did. So I won it.
You walked out 1-0, huh?
Exactly. And I felt good about that, you know. Yeah.
On this episode of One-on-One, our guest tonight is from Thibodaux. He's a very prominent attorney and comes from a very prominent family. Who is that guest? You'll find out coming up shortly on this edition of One-on-One. You've been practicing 42 years.
I have.
I said, when are you going to give it up? Your answer to me was, when it's not fun anymore, but I'm still having fun.
Exactly.
So you still like what you do?
I think anybody that is working today, if they're not interested in it, and if they're not passionate about it, if they don't want to put their best foot forward for their clients, for their patients, for their viewer audience, whoever it is, I think they ought to give it up. But I still like it. I still like meeting with clients. I still like making presentations in court. So I'm not giving it up anytime soon. I mean, I'm
Like
going
I
to
said,
say, I'm going to be like Joe Waits, and you know, and the real institutional institutions, I should say, you know, people that just stayed around forever. Now, you know, Matthew will probably convince me that I need to start, you know, scaling back a little bit as I start losing my memory and start kind of doing things like that.
You spawned my next question, Mr. Joe Waits. Of course, I interviewed him at length. He was a dear friend and passed away recently. I always said he always aspired, until Miss Nellie talked him out a couple of times, running for office.
He did.
How come you never ran?
Because I would always tell people I would never give them a chance to vote against me. You know, I never wanted. I liked politics, Martin. You know, I was always interested in politics.
You're always behind the scenes.
But I never was interested in really running for office. And I guess it was kind of a function of, you know, my dad always told the story, and I always thought it was a great story, that he said at some point in time he was walking, and this was probably in the 50s, he was walking on Main Street in Thibodeau, and a guy approached him and said, "Mr. Block, you're such a good man. You're such a good businessman. You should run for office. You should run for mayor." And my daddy was very humble, and he said, "Well, no, but thank you very much. I appreciate you saying that." And Dad kind of tried to get away, and the guy kept following him. "Mr. Block, you really ought to do this. The community needs you, etc." And then finally, Dad said, "No, I'm not really interested, but thank you very much." And then finally, the guy said, "Look, loan me $25 if you don't mind, Mr. Block." So I guess to some extent, I always felt like politics wasn't really for me and kind of my family. You know, my first wife didn't want me to run. My second wife certainly didn't want me to run for politics, and I never really got that far into it, you know. But I've always liked being connected, because I've always thought that that people should respect political office and should respect the people in political office. And I've always tried to be helpful to different candidates along the way.
What's the funnest case you ever had where you went in the courtroom and it was just challenging, and it was just, when it was all over with, you said, "Man, that was a good one"?
Is that there was a horrible automobile wreck in Thibodeau, and we wound up suing Subaru, and it was a case in which several young girls, teenage girls, had been involved, and there were some tragic injuries, horrible injuries. And we wound up suing Subaru and got a very nice judgment against Subaru in connection with that. But we actually had the vehicle outside the courtroom so the jury could come and inspect the vehicle and take a look at the vehicle. We had experts from California and New York and all over, and it was probably one of the more interesting cases. Another case that I was involved in that was interesting too was against Chevron, and it was a case where what the proof was in that case was that Chevron had not paid the state of Louisiana. We represented the state of Louisiana, had not paid royalties, oil royalties. And we were very successful in that case and got a very large judgment.
Do you find on these cases, Jerald, that you're constantly, in other words, the Subaru case, did it answer questions in your Chevron case, or is there always something different that you're going, this has a different twist and it's going a different direction?
I think, you know, once you learn how to make the presentation, then whatever the facts are, whatever the circumstances are, you adapt your presentation and the information you have to that particular case.
What's the most challenging part of being in a case like, is it working the jury or is it working the judge, who ultimately controls the jury?
I think the most challenging part of it, Martin, is being ready for the next day, being prepared for the next day. To me, you know, when we would be in trial mode, sometimes we would, you know, continue working until 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning and then be ready for court the next day. Because every day was different. The first day was jury selection. The second day was opening statements. The third day was direct presentation of witnesses. And then, down the line, maybe, the fifth or sixth or seventh day or 2 weeks later, you'd be ready to give closing arguments. So, I mean, all throughout this whole time period, you're sitting there and you have to be ready, prepared for the next day, because jurors don't want dead time. They don't want to be in a situation where they're sitting there and the lawyers are thinking, well, what kind of question am I going to ask?
Yeah, they can turn on you.
They do. And
you're boring.
And look, you can't blame them,
right,
because they're captives in this case, and they're sitting there and they want to be involved. They want to be connected. And if the lawyers are not prepared and the lawyers are not keeping the pace of the trial up, it gets to be boring.
I know y'all have handled a lot of the, and not to get into your business, the BP working all of it, but what's the biggest case you think as an attorney that you were involved in? Doesn't have to just be monetarily, but maybe in the public eye. What case, is it the BP case?
Well, I think the biggest case is probably the average wholesale price case that we're involved in, where we represent the state of Louisiana. No, it's not a class action. It's a mass joinder case in which we wound up representing the state and Department of Health and Hospitals, and we've recovered probably $200 million for the state of Louisiana in that case. And we sued 108 pharmaceutical companies, and it really were the best lawyers in the United States. The Kirkland and Ellis from Chicago, the great law firms, the big law firms, and we were against all of them, and we did very well. I mean, that's as a matter of fact, that's the case that Matthew's involved in right now, a jury trial that's against Watson Pharmaceutical Company, but we recovered over $200 million for the state, and it has been one of those things, and it's a Medicaid fraud case in which the pharmaceutical companies were overcharging the state of Louisiana for pharmaceutical drugs, and I think that case has made me feel very good, because we wound up giving back money to the state that they deserved, and to the Medicaid program, which really deserved it because they serve, an underserved population.
Right. Did you ever think, when you decided you were going to be an attorney, when you got into law school, when you graduated, you had your first, Mr. Knobloch sent you in, you're seeing Judge Lottinger, that you'd be handling a $200 million case?
No, I thought I'd be.
That's an incredible amount of money.
No, it is an incredible amount of money, but no, I never thought in those days that I would be doing that. It's kind of one of those things where you think, I want to handle big cases and I want to be against some of the best lawyers in the United States. But did I ever really think back then that would come to fruition? No, I didn't.
Let me ask you this: why did you? Once again, I've seen you very well in a courtroom. You do very well. But why did you decide? You could have went anywhere in the country, but you stayed at home to practice. Why?
That's a great question, Martin. And I was born and raised in Thibodeau, and honestly, I never thought about practicing anywhere else. I wanted to come back because because it was home, right, and because I felt comfortable being in Thibodeau. I knew I had offers where I could go to other places, but I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to just come to Thibodeau and practice law, and, as they say, hang your shingle out there and do the best you could. Because I thought the people in Thibodeau were, the best people anywhere in the world. The people in Thibodeau, in Houma, in Napoleonville, in South Louisiana. And I always enjoyed kind of the Cajun lifestyle. And I didn't want to be anywhere else where I couldn't experience that on a daily basis.
You know, when these high-powered attorneys come in from Chicago and everywhere else, New York, and they come in your courtroom and you know they're wheeling in briefcase full of briefcase, and you're sitting there and you beat them at the end of the day.
It feels pretty good.
Yeah.
It feels pretty good. Yeah, and you know, and look, some of those lawyers, you know, will complain about, oh, it was hometown justice, or it was an unfair advantage. And honestly, I have never felt like any of the judges that I've ever appeared in front of in either Houma or Thibodaux or Napoleonville or any of those places that I've handled plenty of cases in St. Charles Parish. I never felt any of those judges or any of those juries gave hometown justice. I always felt they wanted to be fair. I always thought that juries were willing to be fair no matter what, across the board, and I always respected their opinions. So it's a little bit sour grapes when somebody comes in and they lose, and then they say it was just a hometown justice. It really isn't true. I don't think the judges look at it that way, and I know they haven't in my cases.
When you turn the lights off in your office and you get in your car and you're driving home, what kind of music you listen to?
You know, I have 3 children. I have Matthew, who practices law with me, who's going to be 40 years old, Jason, who's a doctor in Boston, and my daughter Rebecca, who just graduated from law school, and she's 24. Okay. And so Matthew and Jason kind of gravitated to country music. Okay. And so during the time when they were younger, I listened to a lot of country music. Right. I really like country music. And now I like just different kind of music. I like classical music. Okay. You know, I like piano music. I like, you know, I just like a lot of different kind of music.
No
I mean,
rap,
no rap. But if you got to my iPad and my music on my iPhone or whatever, right, and you'd look at it and you'd say, wow, this is some old time stuff, you know, 50s music, you know, the old days, but also, you know, the kind of doo-wop music, but also you'd see country and you'd see.
So you've sort of changed with the time.
I guess so.
You've held on to the.
I guess
held
so.
on to the old stuff, but you changed.
But part of it, I guess, is having a younger daughter too. You know, is that, you know, because it really was like, you know, Matthew 40 years old, Jason 38, and then having a 24-year-old. When you have a 24-year-old, they're going to introduce you to different things than the 40-year-old and the 38-year-old.
She's in law school?
She just graduated from law school and just took the bar exam, so she's waiting for her results. No, she's going to work for Judge John Connery on the Third Circuit in Lake Charles, but he has his office in New Iberia.
Okay, well, so you got 2.
Got 2.
2 of them in the same field. Yeah. One's a doctor. All right.
One's a doctor in Boston.
If you had to pick a favorite movie of all time, what would it be and why? You know, there's a lot of attorneys out there. Cool Hand Luke?
Cool Hand Luke.
All right.
You know, I would have to say, Cool Hand Luke. When you take the bar exam, you have to give them a fake name. So my fake name was Cool Hand Luke, because you have to give a fake name or a number or something like that, because they don't want to know who the person is that's going to be, you know, they don't want it to be some politician's son or whatever, and they got a benefit. So you have to give a fake name, and that's all anybody ever knows, the bar examiners. And mine was Cool Hand Luke because that was the movie, you know, Paul Newman and you know, just being a really, you know, tough guy. I like Shawshank Redemption. That movie is just such a great movie. So maybe I'm attracted to kind of those prisoner movies. I don't know.
So let me ask you, growing up, I see a little mischievous side. Were you mischievous as a kid?
I would have to say I was, Martin.
Right.
I got in
And
my
I can see
share
your
of
brother
trouble.
being a little more even keeled.
He was more even keeled, and as my older brother, he would say, "No, you can't do that anymore." He was always he was always a little steadier. But I did get in my share of tiffs and problems and all that kind of stuff. Nothing that ever got me put away, but
Right.
but I did get in my share of
But
trouble.
isn't that the personality that put you on the path to maybe winning a $200 million case?
It probably did. It probably did because it made you quick on your feet.
Yeah.
When you have
You
that
had some
kind
good
of
street value.
exactly.
Yeah.
When you have that kind of mischievous kind of thought process, sometimes you always want to be quick on your feet to be able to get out from under.
Right.
And so I did. And that is true.
your
You
parents
read me
strict on you?
correctly. Yeah, they were strict. I mean, my dad was really a no-nonsense dad.
Yeah.
I mean, he was, like I said, he never, he wasn't a vacation person. He wasn't a hunter. He wasn't a fisherman. He never did. I mean, we took one family vacation when we were growing up. That was it.
His business.
Because he was pure business.
Yeah.
And so, and so he was tough. I mean, he was. I wrecked a couple of his cars, did a couple of things like that, and he wasn't happy about it. But it was like, okay, this is what you did. Now you got to pay for it.
Right. So he made you accountable.
Oh, he made us accountable. And I think over the years, him making me accountable has made me feel like in the courtroom, making people accountable is an appropriate thing. Right. Whether you're a lawyer and you've made a mistake and you've committed malpractice and injured somebody, or a doctor in a medical malpractice situation, or an engineer, or a drunk driver, or anybody like that. I'm a strong believer in accountability, and I think that's probably a function of my family values, and from both my mom and my dad.
If you had to do it all over again, would there be anything you did different, or do you like the way your path has gone? You've been pretty successful.
I would say overall, looking back, would I do some things differently? Sure. But overall, I probably wouldn't make any major changes. Some of my time as a lawyer has been dealing with family issues for other families, and that can be such an absolute horrible situation. And my kids have been absolutely great kids, never got in trouble, never did really have that kind of mischievous side to them that I had. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's been a blessing for me to have really good kids, and they're not kids but young adults.
As you get older in your practice in your small town of Thibodeau, seems like most people get involved in things outside the practice. You're no different. You want to see things that are good for the community. What are some of the things you've been involved in that you're proud of?
I am the chairman of the board of St. Joseph Manor, which is an assisted living facility in Thibodeau. And it's one of the things that I'm very, very proud of, because we serve our residents, and honestly, Ann Thibodeau, who is the administrator, does most of the absolute heavy lifting along with her staff. But I'm on the board, and it's a volunteer board, and it is one of the things that I've been the most proud of. We are right now going to build a development in Thibodeau called Cardinal Place, which is going to be right next door to St. Joseph Manor. And what Cardinal Place is going to be is, instead of assisted living, it's going to be independent living. And we're going to build, the first phase, 24 independent living apartments that people will be able to live in, but it'll be on a safe and secure campus. And it will be where they're going to have kitchens, and they're going to have different things that are going to be available to them. And this is all nonprofit, right, through the diocese, and it's one of the things that I've really been proud of. I served years ago as the Louisiana State Chairman of the American Cancer Society. I was very proud to do that. So I've always been actively
Why do
involved.
you do that? You don't have to. You made enough money where you could go home and sit back, but your brothers also served on boards. Is this something that also your mom and dad instilled in you?
My dad and mom were both very community-minded people, and you know, they always taught us, I think, look, you know, you're not better than anybody, but you're just as good as anybody. Mm-hmm. But you have to remember that, because you have to be able to give back. Don't just make it all about you. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about having the prettiest camp in Grand Isle, or a vacation home in Gulf Shores, mm-hmm. or you know, any of those things. Give back to the community, be part of the community. And it was one of the things that motivated me to come back to Thibodaux in the first place, mm-hmm. is that I knew that I could make a connection to the people that had made my family successful, and be able to serve them. You know, right now at St. Joseph Manor, we've had and really, St. Joseph Manor was a vision of Monsignor Francis Amedee. He is the one that came up with the concept. But it has allowed people, instead of, you know, somebody who was in a situation where they were better than a nursing home, they should not be in a nursing home, but they couldn't live at home anymore.
Right.
And this gave them the chance to live more or less independently, mm-hmm. with some assistance. And it's been a
they
great...
They keep their pride.
Exactly. And they could keep their pride, their dignity, their self-respect, mm-hmm. And if they wanted to, they could use their vehicles, they could do whatever they right. wanted to. And whatever they were able to do to kind of keep their lifestyle going. So I've been real proud of that, real happy about that.
Unfortunately, time does fly, but if I got Judge Barbera in a room, I got your kids in a room, and got your brother who's practiced with you, go back to Mr. Noblat, if we could talk to your parents for a little while, and I get other people around the community like Cam Beauvant and different people of that nature. I said, all right, Jerald's an interesting person. He was a little mischievous back in the day. Mm-hmm. He told me on the show. But one word that would describe him, what would you hope the one word would be that they come up with? That's going to be a tough one for you.
I would hope that the one word they would use would be committed. Not only as a lawyer, but as a dad, mm-hmm. As a parent, as a spouse. You know, I think the word committed would be the word I would use. Mm-hmm. You know, if I agree to represent somebody, I'm committed to them. I'm committed to their case. I'm committed, you know, heart and soul. And nobody's going to outwork me. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to spend more time. If it needs to be, nobody's going to spend more money prosecuting the case. But I think that word would probably be the word that I would use about me. I don't think I'm smarter than anybody, but I think that if I'm committed, that is my gift to my clients and to my children.
So you'd be like a Peyton Manning or Drew Brees in the film room all the time? I
would be. I would be very, very committed to making sure that everybody excelled and everybody was playing their A game.
So committed. All right, that's a good word for you. I want to thank you for coming on our show today. You've been a great asset to the community, and like I said, I've seen you in the courtroom, and one thing about you, you are prepared when you go in. It's been an interesting conversation. Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it, Martin. Thank you. Okay.